I did not expect her to have a document. That is where I must begin because everything else, the turning of my brother's life, the dismantling of a man I had considered armored past all dismantling, and the strange mercy the autumn brought to Thornville Hall proceeds from that one small, devastating fact. She arrived carrying a document. She had drafted it herself. And when she placed it on my brother's desk without a tremble in her hand, the Duke of Thornville, the most formidable man in 3 counties, had absolutely nothing to say. My name is Aldrich Hale. I am the younger son of a late duke, the brother of the living one, and I have made it my quiet occupation these 30 years to observe my elder brother Caspian with the affectionate puzzlement of a man who loves someone he does not entirely understand. Caspian had been cold since he was 12. He had been composed since he was 14. He had been feared since he inherited the dukedom at 23, and he had considered that reputation not merely a fact of his position, but a kind of management tool, a wall that kept the importunate world at a useful distance. He ran Thornville's 10,000 acres with the precision of a clockwork instrument. He conducted his affairs in London with the same economy. He had, as far as I was able to determine, never been surprised by anything in his adult life. Until the morning Miss Cecily Pembroke arrived. I was in the library when I heard it, voices from the study, my brother's and an unfamiliar woman's, and then a silence of such complete and staggered quality that I set down my coffee cup and went to listen at the door. I am not ashamed of it. A man listens at doors when the occasion demands. I have also drafted, the woman's voice was saying, quite pleasantly, a schedule of repayment in the event that you find the terms of Section 2 unacceptable, though I would advise you to read Section 2 carefully before dismissing it. It is, I think you will find, rather more in your favor than my father's original arrangement. I eased the door open precisely half an inch. She was standing at my brother's desk, not sitting, standing, with the posture of someone who had decided the guest's chair was a tactical disadvantage. She was perhaps 24, slight but not fragile, dressed in a dark blue traveling gown that had seen better seasons and knew it. Her hair was dark, arranged simply, and her expression as she regarded my brother was the expression of a woman who had prepared rather thoroughly for this meeting and was mildly interested to see how it unfolded. My brother sat behind the desk with his hands flat on the document she had placed before him. He was reading it. That alone was remarkable. Caspian did not read unsolicited documents. He returned them, but he was reading hers. Your father, he said at last, sent me a letter of intention, Miss Pembroke, not a contract revision. Yes, she said. I know. My father is better at acquiring debts than managing their resolution. I have been managing the household accounts at Pembroke Lodge for 4 years. I thought it would be more efficient if someone with relevant experience drafted the terms. There was another silence. You drafted these yourself, Caspian said. It was not a question. With reference to your own estate's published ledgers from the last fiscal year, which I obtained from your man of business in London. I hope you don't mind. It seemed prudent to understand what I was being offered as settlement before I agreed to anything. I pressed the door open another 1/4 inch. My brother's face was the face of a man encountering a category of thing that his considerable mental filing system had not yet created a drawer for. He looked, and I say this with all brotherly accuracy, as if someone had handed him a letter in a language he was certain he did not speak, and he had understood every word. You came to negotiate, he said. I came to ensure that what my father agreed to on my behalf was, at the very least, equitable, she said. If it is not, I would prefer to know now so that I can explore the alternatives. There are no alternatives, Miss Pembroke. The debt is substantial. The terms your father signed. Commit me to a 12-month residency at Thornville Hall in exchange for forgiveness of the principal, with no provision for my own maintenance, no guarantee of my position within the household, and no exit clause. She tilted her head. Your Grace, I am not a ledger entry. I am prepared to honor my father's word, but I require, at minimum, the 3 provisions outlined in Section 1. He looked down at the document. I watched his jaw tighten, and then, in a sequence I had never in my life seen on my brother's face, I watched it release. Section 1, he said, in a different tone than he had used before, quieter. You want your own rooms and full authority over them. Yes. You want a monthly sum for personal expenses, independent of household accounts. A modest one, the figure is specified. And you want, he paused, and I could have sworn the corner of his mouth moved, though I would not have bet my annual income on it. The right to refuse any instruction you consider unreasonable, with the grounds for refusal to be judged by an agreed neutral party. I thought a solicitor, she said, though I am open to other suggestions. Caspian put the document down. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at her for a long moment, and I, watching through a half-inch crack in the door, realized with sudden clarity that my brother was not annoyed. He was interested. "Miss Pembroke," he said, "how long did this take you to draft?" 4 evenings, she said. "The research into the ledgers took longer. Your estate records are admirably detailed incidentally. Whoever manages your accounts is very good." "I manage my accounts." "Then I compliment your precision." She folded her hands. "Do you accept the terms, Your Grace, or shall we discuss the repayment schedule?" I stepped back from the door. I went back to my coffee. My hand, I noticed, was not entirely steady, because what I had just watched through a half-inch crack in a paneled door was the beginning of something I could not yet name, but which I was very nearly certain would end with my brother on his knees. It is a strange thing, watching a man discover that he has spent his entire adult life inhabiting a fortress he built for reasons he can no longer precisely remember. The terms were accepted, all 3 sections of them. She was installed in the East Wing rooms that afternoon, and she inspected every one of them with the methodical thoroughness of a woman taking inventory. She asked Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper, 3 questions about the water supply, 2 about the state of the chimney flues, and 1, with a directness that left Mrs. Doyle blinking, about whether the linens were changed weekly or fortnightly. Mrs. Doyle, who had managed Thornville Hall for 19 years, and who was not easily impressed, came to find me in the library an hour later. "She's sharp," Mrs. Doyle said. "I had gathered." She asked about the flues with the confidence of a woman who has dealt with a bad one. "Pembroke Lodge is old," I said. "I imagine she has." Mrs. Doyle looked at me with the expression she reserved for understatements. She also thanked me, she said, properly, by name. "No one thanks me by name except you, Mr. Aldrich." I found, to my own mild surprise, that I was smiling. I had managed Thornville Hall's social calendar as a courtesy guest and general younger brother in residence for a long time, and in that time I had met any number of women who passed through the hall on various pretexts. What none of them had ever done was ask Mrs. Doyle a question and listen to the answer with the complete, unreserved attention of someone who considered the person before them worth attending to. It was, I thought, a small thing. It was also not a small thing. The first week was a study in careful orbits. Caspian, who habitually took his meals in the study when there was work to be done, came to the dining table each evening. He said very little, but then Caspian very rarely said more than was necessary. And what was new was not the silence but the quality of it, the way his attention, which was usually distributed across the middle distance with the impartiality of a man reviewing estate problems, came back to Miss Pembroke every few minutes as though it could not help itself. She, for her part, ate with the unhurried composure of a woman who was not going to be rattled by a formidable duke simply because he shared her supper table. She spoke when she had something to say. She did not fill silence with chatter. When Caspian mentioned, almost as a test, that the estate's western drainage scheme had been an unresolved problem for 3 seasons, she asked 2 questions, practical, specific, and then offered an observation drawn from something she had read about a similar scheme in Somerset. Caspian went still, in the way he goes still when he is thinking rather than simply waiting. "You have read about drainage schemes," he said. "I have read about most things," she said. "There is quite a lot of time in a country house when there are no accounts to balance. Most of the women I have entertained here have not found drainage schemes to be an obvious topic. I imagine most of the women you have entertained here have been chosen for qualities that do not include an interest in drainage schemes." There was a silence, and then I had not heard it in, I think, 2 years. My brother laughed. Not a polite sound, not a managed expression of amusement, but a short, genuine, slightly startled laugh, as though it had caught him before he could revise it. Miss Pembroke looked at him with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a hypothesis. I excused myself shortly after and took my wine to the corridor, where I stood for a long moment considering the state of things. My brother had laughed at the supper table. Not a diplomatic sound, not the calibrated expression of a man fulfilling the social requirement of amusement. He had laughed because he was caught off guard by something he found genuinely, unexpectedly funny, and the experience had appeared to surprise him as much as it had surprised me. A woman had come to Thornville Hall as the settlement of a debt. She had arrived with a counter document and section headings. She had asked about chimney flues. She had noticed a loose horseshoe. She had, in approximately 10 days of residence, read my brother's estate ledgers, reviewed his account records, and arrived at the supper table knowing more about the Somerset drainage precedent than most of his professional advisors. And in the Eastern Wing, for the first time in the 19 years since our mother had lived there, someone had asked Mrs. Doyle whether the linens were changed weekly or fortnightly. The second week was less careful. Caspian was in the habit of riding the estate each morning at 7. He had done it alone for as long as I could remember. On the Tuesday of the second week, Miss Pembroke was in the stable yard at 6:15, examining the horses with the critical eye of a woman who had grown up with horses rather better than Pembroke Lodge could currently afford her. When Caspian arrived, he stopped. "Do you ride, Miss Pembroke?" "I do," she said, not turning from the gray she was assessing. "Though this one has a loose shoe on the near hind that your groom appears not to have noticed." Caspian walked over, looked, and called for the groom with a tone that I suspected the groom would not forget for some time. Then he turned back to Miss Pembroke. "The chestnut is sound," he said, "if you ride." She rode. And she rode the way she did everything else, without performance, without the deliberate display of skill that a woman in her position might have deployed to impress a duke, and therefore with the sort of naturalness that is, in my experience, far more arresting than any display. They rode the northern pasture and the eastern wood without speaking very much at all, and when they came back, Caspian gave the horses to the groom and stood for a moment in the yard with the quality of a man who has just done something he did not expect to find agreeable, and said, "Tomorrow at 6, if you like." She said she would think about it. She went at 6. She went the following day, and the day after that, and by the end of the second riding week, I noticed that Caspian had begun to come to breakfast with something in his expression that I struggled at first to name. He had always been precise at breakfast, efficient, attending to correspondence, cutting through the morning with the same economical focus he applied to everything. Now he was occasionally a minute or two late. Once, very briefly, I caught him looking at nothing at all, in the way of a man whose attention has been elsewhere and has not entirely returned. By the end of the third week, they were covering the whole of the estate circuit, and Caspian was talking, actually talking, in the way he talked to almost no one, about the drainage scheme, the northern field rotation, the village mill that needed rehousing, and the question of whether the home farm's grain storage should be expanded before winter or after. He talked about the estate the way a man speaks when he is not merely reporting facts, but genuinely thinking aloud to someone he trusts to follow him, and that quality of thinking aloud was something I had not heard from Caspian in a very long time. Once, in a tone I had never heard from my brother in my life, he spoke about the winter our father died, and the feeling of inheriting 10,000 acres at 23, when all he had wanted was 6 more months to learn what he was doing. I learned this from Mrs. Doyle, who had it from the groom. I was not even slightly ashamed. I had entered the Thornville Hall archives and found a comfortable chair, and I was reading accounts of the estate drainage history of Somerset, on the theory that it was useful to be prepared. There was, in the fourth week, an incident that I observed directly. Caspian had papers from London, a legal matter, something to do with a disputed boundary on the northern field, and he had spread them across the study table with the concentrated displeasure of a man facing a problem that is simultaneously urgent and annoying. I came in to return a book and found Miss Pembroke standing at the table opposite him, reading the papers with her head tilted. "You have read those upside down," I said to her, because they were, in fact, oriented away from where she stood. "I read upside down quite well," she said without looking up. "Your boundary claim rests on the wrong survey. The survey you need is from 1803, not 1798. The 1798 survey predates the drainage work that shifted the northern field's natural boundary by approximately 40 yards. Caspian looked at her. "How do you know that?" "You have the estate records in very good order. I may have looked at them." She picked up the document and turned it right side up. "If you present the 1803 survey to the county court, the claim resolves in your favor with very little argument. If you present the 1798 one, you will be at litigation for the better part of a year. There was a silence of the quality I had come to recognize over the preceding weeks. The silence of my brother encountering, yet again, the fact that the woman in his East Wing rooms had already been there before him. "Miss Pembra," he said, "have you been reviewing my estate records?" "I have reviewed your estate records," she confirmed. "They are, as I said, in excellent order. I made no alterations, I only read." "Most people do not read other people's estate records. Most people do not find them interesting." She set the document down. "Do you want the reference for the 1803 survey? I noted the location in the archive." He watched her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "thank you." She found it. She wrote it down. She gave it to him and left the study, and Caspian sat with the note in his hand and looked at it for a long time, and I, from the doorway, watched my brother's face do something I had not seen it do in 36 years of acquaintance. It softened. Not by much. Caspian did not soften by much. But there was something there, a recognition, I thought, of the specific quality of feeling that comes from being helped not because someone wants something from you, or is afraid of you, or hopes to impress you, but simply because it is useful and she happened to know. He had not been helped in that way by anyone, as far as I could remember, since our mother died. He sent the note to his London solicitor that afternoon. The litigation resolved in 3 weeks. He told me so over breakfast with the brevity of a man reporting a fact, and then he said, "She reads upside down," in a tone that was entirely unlike any tone I had heard him use before, and I looked at my egg and said, "I had noticed," and said nothing else. I did not need to say anything else. I had been watching the Thornville Hall archive drainage records of Somerset for 3 weeks. I understood what was happening. It was in the 5th week that the complication arrived, in the form of Mr. Aubrey Pembra. Her father was a man of a type I had met before, not malicious, I thought, but weak in the specific way that becomes indistinguishable from malicious when money is involved. He was handsome in a faded way, with the well-kept appearance of a man who had once had good income and could no longer quite remember that he no longer had it. He was pleasant in the surface manner of someone who has always managed his difficulties by charming his way past them, and he arrived at Thornville Hall on a Thursday afternoon with a traveling bag, a complimentary remark about the condition of the drive, and the air of a man who had come to inspect a settlement and ensure that it was proceeding to his advantage. He admired the entrance hall. He inquired warmly after my health. He accepted tea and made 3 pleasant observations about the autumn light on the grounds, and I watched him with the attention I have developed over a lifetime of watching, and understood that all of this pleasantness was the preamble to something that was not going to be pleasant at all. He did not stay with the arrangement. He informed Caspian in the study, and I was in the corridor. I am not apologizing for it, a better one. A banker in Bristol, recently widowed and willing to take Miss Pembra at somewhat shorter notice, in exchange for the forgiveness of a separate, newer debt that Pembra had apparently managed to accumulate in the 3 months since the Thornville arrangement was concluded. "She is already here," Caspian said, with the economy of a man setting down a fact. Yes, and the arrangement has been useful, I am sure," Pembra said, "but the Bristol situation is rather more pressing, you understand. The man wants to move quickly. If you could simply consider the month she has been here as partial payment and allow me to—" "She is not a currency," Caspian said. The change in his tone was something I felt rather than heard. It was not loud. It was very quiet, and it was a kind of quiet that has nothing casual in it, the quiet of a decision already made. "I beg your pardon," Pembra said. "Your daughter is not a currency," Caspian said. "She is not a payment or a partial payment or a settlement of any description. She is a person, and she has been here for 5 weeks, and she has demonstrated more intelligence and more usefulness to this estate than anyone I have employed in the last decade, and I will not have her transferred to a banker in Bristol because you have managed to accumulate a second debt in 3 months. Now see here, she is my daughter, and I have the legal right." "You signed a contract," Caspian said. "The terms are clear. She remains at Thornville Hall for the agreed period. If you have a new debt in Bristol, I suggest you find another means of addressing it. I will not allow that debt to be addressed with her." There was a lengthy silence. "You cannot simply—" "I can," Caspian said, "and I have. Good afternoon, Mr. Pembra." I heard the study door. I moved very quickly for the library. Caspian found me there 10 minutes later. He stood in the doorway with his hands behind his back and a look on his face that I had spent the last 5 weeks watching arrive, increment by small increment, and which had now arrived in full. "I need to speak to her," he said. "I imagine you do," I said. "I don't," he stopped. My brother, who was never at a loss for precise language, stopped in the middle of a sentence and looked at me with an expression that was wholly unfamiliar. It took me a moment to identify it because I had not seen it since he was very young. It was uncertainty. "I don't know how to do this without making it seem as though she is exchanging one obligation for another," he said. "She came here as a debt. I do not want her to feel that I am simply revising the terms." I set down my book. I looked at my brother, who was 6 years older than me and 9 inches taller, and who had run 10,000 acres and a dukedom for 13 years without assistance, and who was currently standing in a library doorway trying to find a way to speak honestly to a woman without disadvantaging her. "Tell her that," I said. He looked at me. "Tell her what?" "What you just told me, that you don't know how to do it without making it seem that way. Tell her exactly that." I picked up my book again. "She reads upside down, Caspian. She can manage a sentence." He was gone for a long time. I finished a chapter and started a second and got most of the way through it, and then the library door opened and Miss Pembroke came in. She sat down in the chair across from mine with the composure that was her native element and looked at me with the directness that I had admired since the first morning. "Your brother," she said, "is very strange." "He is," I agreed. "He spent 4 minutes telling me why he did not know how to say something before saying it." She considered this. I found it rather more convincing than if he had simply said it. "He has not had much practice at it," I said. "He has not, in my observation, spoken to anyone in the way he has spoken to you in the last 5 weeks." She was quiet for a moment. "He tore the document," she said. "Which document?" "The original one, my father's, the debt agreement." She looked at the window. Outside, the autumn light was doing something useful to the copper beeches. "He took it out of the drawer and tore it in half in front of me and put it in the fire." I waited. "And then," she said, He said that what he wanted was not something that could be resolved by a document, and that if I chose to leave Thornville Hall, he would ensure that my father's remaining debts were settled from the estate regardless, with no condition attached, because he did not want me to stay out of obligation." She paused. "He was very precise about it. He seemed to think precision was the least he owed me." "He thought correctly," I said. "And then he asked," she said, "whether if all of those things were true, I might consider," he used the word consider. He was very careful about the word consider. "Whether I might consider remaining. Not on the terms of the original arrangement. On no terms at all. On whatever terms I would draw up myself." I looked at her. "And what did you say?" She looked at me with the expression of a woman who has reviewed the relevant documentation and reached a conclusion that satisfies all 3 sections. "I said I would need a day to think about it," she said, "because I like to be precise about things." And she got up and left the library, and I sat with my book and the copper beeches and the autumn light, and I understood that my brother's fortress, which had stood for 13 years on the foundations of precision and distance and a reputation for being feared, had come down in 5 weeks because a woman had arrived with her own document and refused to be a ledger entry. She took the day. She thought about it in whatever way she thought about things, thoroughly, I imagined, with reference to whatever relevant precedents she could find. The following morning, she came to the study at 8 o'clock. I know because Caspian told me later over breakfast with the brevity of a man reporting a fact. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She stood at the desk, standing, not sitting, which he said he had expected because she had stood at the desk the first morning, and she was not a woman who surrendered a tactical position without reason. And she said, in the tone of someone who has reached a considered position, "I have thought about it." He waited. "I have one condition," she said. He said he had prepared himself for several. "One," she repeated, "that whatever I am here, whether I stay a month or a decade, whether this becomes what you seemed to suggest yesterday or remains simply," she had apparently paused here to find the right word, "a mutual arrangement of unusual clarity, I am always spoken to as you spoke to me yesterday. Not managed, not redirected, not told what I am too young or too inexperienced or too female to understand. Spoken to." He said, "That is the only condition." She said, "That is the condition on which all the others depend." And Caspian, who had run a dukedom for 13 years on precision and economy, who had defended a boundary claim with a survey reference she found in 40 minutes in an archive he had owned for over a decade, who had thrown a solicitor-level debt document into a fireplace because he would not have her stay out of obligation. Caspian came around the desk. He stood before her. He was considerably taller. She did not adjust her posture. He said, "You have my word." She looked at him for a moment. Then she put out her hand, not the gesture of a woman deferring, but the gesture of a person concluding an agreement between equals. He took it. He did not let go immediately. She, as far as I can tell, did not require him to. I have told this story a few times over the years, at dinners and in drawing rooms when someone asks how my brother found his duchess. I tell it the way I have told it here, from the door, from the corridor, from the library, from the Copper Beech window, because it was not my story to be inside of. I was the witness of it, and I think that is the right word. A witness is what that kind of thing requires. What I know from my vantage is this. She rewrote the household accounts in the first 3 months of her marriage with an efficiency that made Thornville's man of business write Caspian a letter of impressed bewilderment. She settled the Northern Field boundary case by producing, of her own accord, a second relevant survey she had found in a separate archive that had not occurred to anyone to check. She argued with Caspian about the village mill for 6 weeks and won on 3 of the 4 disputed points, and he came to dinner on the evening she won the 3rd looking, I thought, happier than I had seen him since before our father died. And Caspian, who had been cold since he was 12, composed since he was 14, feared since he was 23, began to laugh at supper. Not managed laughter, not the polite version. Real laughter, of the kind that arrives before you can stop it, because the person across from you has said something that found a gap in all your careful armor and walked through it while you were looking the other way. She had come to Thornville Hall with terms of her own. It turned out they were the right ones. The last thing I remember of that autumn, the image that stays, the one I return to when I think about what love actually looks like when it is chosen rather than fallen into, is a morning in November early, before the house was properly awake. I had come down for coffee and found the study door open, and inside it Caspian and his new wife, both standing at the estate table with the drainage plans spread before them, arguing in low voices about the correct placement of a culvert near the western field. She was pointing at something on the plan. He was disagreeing. She said something brisk. He laughed. She looked up and caught him at it, the way she had the first evening at supper, with the satisfaction of someone confirming a hypothesis. He put his hand over hers on the map, not thinking about it, the way a man touches something that has become simply and irrevocably part of the landscape of his life. I took my coffee to the library. I did not disturb them. I thought about the morning she had arrived, the document on the desk, the 3 sections, the quiet woman who stood rather than sat because she had decided the chair was a tactical disadvantage. And I thought about what it is that a man finds, if he is very fortunate, when the world sends him someone who refuses to be managed. A witness knows when to close the door.